Hello everyone, in this tutorial we're gonna see how to customize MNPRX materials, and in this case we're gonna specifically see how to support UDIMs with it. Now we have this really cool model here, which is a rifle created by Sergey Khanin, and it already has different groups of geometry that have been renamed according to their UDIMs. This is gonna help us a lot in setting this up. So now that we have this, one of the advantages of UDIMs is that they all share the same, like you're using different patches of textures within a single material. Now let's check out first the UV editor. And as you can see here, different parts of the rifle have different UV coordinates. And this is what makes UDIMs so powerful. In order to have more detail in certain parts of the object, you don't need to go between a 2K texture and a 4K texture that suddenly has 4 times more data. You could go from 2K texture to 2K textures and have the same amount of detail in the parts where you need it. Now, if your application works with UDIMs and you want to work with UDIMs in MNPRX, you will need to set this up manually, and you will therefore need to customize the ShaderFX graph for it. Now let's get to it. First of all, I'm going to increase the world scale here. I'm going to put it to 10 so that we have everything without any atmosphere tint. Now I'm going to go and pick up here, this might be the barrel, and I'm going to create a new material preset. So I'm going to go here and I'm just going to create a basic watercolor material, and I'm gonna load it. Now we have the watercolor material loaded here. We already have an initial light, and that's why once the lighting is enabled in the viewport, things, when you're using the Maya Lambert, will get really dark. Now we have this rifle already set up. What we're gonna do is we're gonna assign the same material to all the remaining objects. We could have done that by selecting all of the objects and simply loading the texture, but we can also do that through the hypershade within Maya. We can select all of this and add to selection. I'm gonna rename this, give it a more descriptive name. This is gonna be my UDIMs SFX. SFX stands for ShaderFX. Now, something important when working with a hypershade, if you want to work again with the attribute editor, you should close the hypershade, otherwise they both might conflict with each other and you won't see some changes. Now we have the gun here. Let's add a albedo texture, and we're gonna select the base color. Once we load this in, the base color is gonna be there, and it's gonna have the color tint, so make sure when working with textures that this is set to white if you don't want a color tint, and that you set the light override here to 0 so that it doesn't have like a custom color. Now, as you can see, this does not look right at all. And that is because all of these objects that usually have a different UDIM assigned to them are sharing the same UDIM. So let's take a closer look to that. If we load up the materials and we open the ShaderFX graph here, you're going to see all the nodes that create this ShaderFX material. Now the first thing that you need to do when modifying these nodes here is to set the custom graph node value to true. Once this is true, whenever you're updating the materials in the future, this one won't be overwritten by any updates, and you will get to keep the custom node networks that you create. Now we just created and assigned an albedo texture, and because all of these different parts of the object have different UDIMs, the only part that actually has the right texture is this 1001, is the front of the rifle. Why do the other parts still have texture? Is because we have, by default, this texture here set to wrap as a sampler. That means that within 0 and 1 in the U direction, it's going to have that texture. Between 1 and 2, it's going to have the same texture again, so it's going to repeat itself. And if we look at the UV editor and the UVs that we have, the front, this one here, will have the right UVs. But once we go here and we select this part, as you can see, this doesn't really have even a texture representation, But because this is set to wrap this node, texture here is going to repeat here and so forth. So we need to be able to attach a different texture at this coordinate or this block here, a different for this block and so forth, so that each UDIM will have its own texture. So to do this, we need to make a few changes. First of all, we don't need this right now. What we need to do here is go to the texture. I'm gonna rename this to U1 so that we know what we're working with. And then I'm gonna set the sampler in the U coordinate to border and in the V coordinate to border. What this allows us to do is, as you see, the texture is only applied between 0 and 1, and all the rest will be black. And this is perfect because we can then add different textures to different parts of the objects according to their UDIMs. So now that we have our U1, we need to add a U2. So we go and add a texture map. This texture map is gonna be the U2, and we set this back to border and border. Once we have this texture map, we can load up 102 base color. So we load up this texture here, and we do the same thing with the remaining UVs. This is gonna be U3. This is gonna be the next texture, base 3. We do this until we have all the UDIMs loaded in textures. Alright, now that we have all our UDIM textures loaded, we need to connect them together so that we have all of them within the same material here. So in order to do this, we need to do a little bit of math. So we're gonna add in a add node, and this add node is going to add this texture together with the U1, which we pick our GBA and plug this here. And this result is gonna go into the albedo texture. Now let's see what happens. As you can see, not much has happened apart from the front becoming even brighter. And this is because what we're doing here is we are adding this texture to this texture, but at the same coordinates between 0 and 1. So what we need to do is to add this texture to this texture at a different coordinate to offset it and make it work with the UDIMs. And to do that, we're gonna add a UV set node here. And this by default will be between 0 and 1. So if we hook this up here, there won't be any change. But when we're using ShaderFX graph, we can create another add node, and we're gonna add these by a custom float2 value. Now that we have the float2 value here, we can hook this up here, hook this up here, and this will go here. Now, as you can see, this texture completely disappeared. And that is because this here should not be 1, 1, but should rather be -1. And because all our UDIMs are only in U direction and are not in V direction, we're gonna put this one to 0. Once we have that, as you can see, we have just loaded the next texture in the right place of the object. And we can do the same with the rest. So I'm going to smooth shade all. So I'm going to quickly do the same thing with the remaining textures. So I just come here, copy this, paste. I bring this down here. I'm moving these textures here. And because this is U3, this is going to be -2. Then this new UV set will be plugged into the UV of the U3 texture, and this is gonna be added together with U2. So we plug this here, we plug this here, and this result will in turn go and add itself with a U1. So it's like a concatenation of textures. Once we have that, you will see here that our rifle is slowly acquiring all the textures that were created at different UDIM positions. So let's continue doing this. I'm gonna copy now 3 nodes, which are the 3 that we need to create. I copy them, I paste them. I set up the UV here. I set up this, and first also need to change this to -3 because we're changing the UV coordinates of the U4 texture, and this is again going to be added to the U3 instead. So I'm just gonna put it here. I'm adding this and I'm hooking this up to the next add operation. Now you can see that this can quickly escalate the more UVs or UDIMs you have. But this should not be too much of a problem because normally only very important characters require the resolutions that UDIM gives. So we might bring a tool to automate this in the future, but we currently are having other priorities. However, if you really would like us to work on this and there's a lot of demand, we might push it into one of the monthly updates that we do. So this is going to be -4, and this is going to be here and together with the previous one. So we hook this up here and the last one here. And now there's only one more texture left. So I do the same. I copy these nodes, I paste them, I set this up correctly. This is going to be -5. And then we hook this up to UV. We hook this up here. And the last thing we do is combine these together. Just going to move this a bit closer. And this is going to go down here. And that's it for the setup of this rifle. So now this rifle has the right UV textures for each part of it, and it is fully set up with a UDIM workflow. Now just remember that the more UDIMs you have, the more of this custom network or texture connection you will have to do, especially if you are also having UDIMs for different texture maps, like for example normals or displacement maps, then you will have to do this accordingly as well. So working with UDIMs can be a bit cumbersome, but it's totally possible. And this is a great example on how you can customize your ShaderFX network and go beyond what the MNPRX Uber material provides. One closing remark on UDIMs is that in case you have also not only textures in U, but also in V direction, make sure to change the value of this node and change the Y value thereof. So in case you were not to only have patches in the U direction, in the UV editor, sometimes you also have things that are over here or over here. You can also shift them using the same float2 node that we have here and bring them into the material. The cool thing about working with UDIMs is that all of these textures now can be controlled from a single material. So if I were to change the cambiante here, I can change this. If I were to add color tint to the whole model, I could easily come here and add a very slight orange tint to match, for example, like a sunset. So yes, this is how you customize ShaderFX using the ShaderFX network or graph. In case you have any questions, please let us know. We'll do our best to help. And in case you want to learn more about ShaderFX, we strongly recommend you to go into the documentation, go here into the Uber material. And here I talk a lot about all the different options of the Uber material, but something that's very interesting is that you can follow these tutorials in order to learn more about the ShaderFX framework. And in case you're interested in customizing the ShaderFX material, you can always refer to the advanced section here. How to modify nodes inside of the ShaderFX material, how to put your own noise effects algorithms, and how to create your own ShaderFX materials. These are advanced topics though, so you should be familiar with working with ShaderFX before attempting any of these. That's it. If you have any questions, as said previously, hit us up in the comments. we'll try our best to reply as soon as possible. See you guys!